So I've been going down a bit of a rabbit hole lately, and I figured I might as well bring you along for it. For the past few weeks, I've been cataloguing Pokémon mistakes. Not in a gotcha, the whole franchise is a disaster sort of way. More in the spirit of going through old family photos and laughing warmly at the strange ones. The ones where someone blinked, or the framing went slightly wrong, or there's a wheelie bin in the background that really shouldn't be there. Fond, a bit obsessive, possibly more thorough than necessary. The thing about Pokémon is that it really is everywhere, and it has been for a long time. It started in 1996 with Red and Blue on the original Game Boy, made by a small team under significant time pressure, for a piece of hardware that was already 4 years old at that point. Since then, it's grown into an anime series that's been running continuously for nearly 30 years, into trading cards, hundreds of separate sets, billions of individual cards printed worldwide, into spin-offs, into mobile apps, into animated films, and eventually into a live-action film where Ryan Reynolds played a small yellow detective mouse in a little hat, which was a choice. That's quite a lot of surface area for things to go slightly wrong. 100 mistakes tonight, spread across all those different corners of the franchise. Some are very small, an animation error that lasts half a second, a printing inconsistency that changed what an attack does. Some are considerably larger and had genuinely real-world consequences. Most are somewhere in the middle, glitchy, confusing, occasionally baffling, and always a bit more interesting than you'd expect once you start looking closely. Worth saying up front that mistake is a broad category here. I'm using it to cover programming bugs, animation errors, trading card printing goofs, translation mistakes, design decisions that seemed reasonable at the time and then really didn't, and a handful of things that are simply hard to explain. No strict taxonomy. If it was wrong, weird or unintended, it's in. Also worth mentioning that a lot of these mistakes have become beloved in their own right. Missing No has its own dedicated fan base, a trading card that exists only because of a stamping accident at a printing facility in the late 90s is now worth more than most people's cars. Some of the most discussed moments in Pokémon history are things that went wrong rather than right. There's something quite nice about that, I think. Mistakes with longevity. If you're watching this to fall asleep, that's exactly what it's designed for. Comfortable pace throughout, no sudden reveals or jarring moments, just me going through something I find genuinely interesting at an easy pace. The subscribe button's somewhere around here if you want more of this sort of thing. No pressure. There's no particular order to any of this. I'm not saving the worst for last. We'll move through the games, then the anime, then the trading cards and back again a few times. Each section sits on its own. Quite suitable for this format, I think. The goal isn't to reach a conclusion so much as to be comfortable for a while. Right, the games first, the very first ones. And the remarkable number of things that went sideways in them, starting with a small team, a Game Boy, and 6 years of development that somehow produced some of the most beloved software in gaming history. The first two Pokémon games, Red and Blue, originally Red and Green in Japan, were developed by Game Freak over roughly 6 years, from about 1991 to 1996. 6 years sounds like plenty, but the development was notoriously troubled. The hardware was temperamental, the team was small, somewhere around 15 people at the core, and there were periods where the project nearly collapsed entirely. Satoshi Tajiri reportedly sold off a significant portion of his personal belongings to keep funding going. What came out the other side was extraordinary. It was also, without much competition, the buggiest mainline Pokémon game ever shipped. The combination of complex interconnected systems, aggressive development timelines, and extremely limited hardware produced a game full of interactions its creators hadn't anticipated. Some of them are minor, some of them are genuinely strange. A few became famous enough to take on lives of their own. Let's go through them. The first one is Missing No, which if you grew up playing these games you almost certainly know already. It's possibly the most famous glitch in Nintendo's entire history. Here's how it works. There's a hidden encounter table on the eastern coast of Cinnabar Island. When you surf along that specific strip of water, the game populates that encounter zone with whatever it finds at a particular location in memory. Normally, this area contains nothing, but the game doesn't leave the slot empty. Instead, it reads data from the characters in your player's name and interprets them as Pokémon species identifiers. If your name contains characters that don't correspond to any real Pokémon, and many ordinary combinations of letters do exactly that, the game tries to load a species that doesn't exist. What it loads instead is Missing No, a scrambled mess of pixel noise, or in some versions a backwards L shape, or a distorted ghost sprite, something the game invented because it had no better answer. The practical side effects are interesting. Missing No famously duplicates the sixth item in your bag, multiplying its quantity. For a lot of players, this was how they ended up with unlimited rare candies or master balls. It can also corrupt your Hall of Fame data, though this doesn't affect gameplay in any meaningful sense. The name is telling. Missing No is short for missing number. It's the game's own error handler, accidentally made accessible to players. Game Freak apparently knew about it and judged it harmless enough to leave in. On balance, probably the right call. What I find genuinely interesting about Missing No is that it became a cultural phenomenon rather than just a known bug. It has fan art, fan fiction, dedicated wikis, people love it. A placeholder for an error became one of the most recognisable things in the entire franchise. Since we're talking about things in Gen I that did the opposite of what they were supposed to do, focus energy. Focus energy is described as helping the user concentrate and land critical hits more often. That's what it says. That's what it does in later games. In Generation 1, using focus energy reduces your critical hit rate to 1/4 of its normal value. A programming error, a simple misread of the variable tracking the critical hit modifier, causes the move to do the literal opposite of its stated effect. Players who built strategies around focus energy were, without knowing it, actively making themselves worse. The trainers who never touched focus energy had significantly better critical hit rates than those who specifically used it for that purpose. This went uncorrected until Generation 3, more than 6 years after the original game's released. Quite a long time to have a move in the game that reliably backfires. Every single move in Generation 1, including moves with 100% accuracy, has a small chance of randomly missing. The chance is 1 in 256. The reason is a quirk in how accuracy is calculated. The game rolls a random number between 0 and 255 and checks whether it falls below the move's accuracy value. 100% accuracy is stored as the number 255, but if the roll happens to land exactly on 255, the comparison fails and the move misses. The odds are small, roughly 0.4% per use, but in competitive contexts, with enough battles, it came up. Swift specifically designed and described as a move that never misses, could miss. Thunder could miss, Thunder could. Moves supposed to be guaranteed would occasionally fail with no explanation or warning. Generation 2 quietly fixed this. The gap between supposed to be guaranteed and actually guaranteed closed. The type chart in Generation 1 explicitly lists Ghost as super effective against Psychic. It's in the manual. Trainers who studied the game would have seen it and planned around it. In practice, Ghost-type moves do 0 damage to Psychic-type Pokémon. A programming error causes the game to treat that matchup as having no effect rather than super effectiveness. The result is that Gengar, the iconic Ghost type, built specifically as a counter to Psychic, literally cannot hurt Kadabra or Alakazam in battle. The type matchup the game documents simply doesn't function. This is a significant reason why Psychic was so dominant in Generation 1. Its supposed weakness didn't work. Combined with the fact that Psychic also had genuine advantages over fighting and poison types, The result was a type category with almost no functional counters for years of competitive play. The type chart was fixed in Generation 2, and Ghost became what the original game always said it was, an actual threat to psychic types. The move substitute creates a decoy from 25% of the user's maximum HP. The decoy takes damage on the user's behalf. Standard stuff. If your Pokemon's current HP is exactly 25% of its maximum, not 24%, not 26%, but precisely that fraction, using substitute causes it to faint immediately. The code in Generation 1 Stadium checks whether the user has more than 25% HP before proceeding. At exactly 25%, that check fails. In Generation Y handheld games, the 25% HP is still consumed, and the user faints. The Pokémon drops to 0 and faints right after producing the substitute. It's an extremely specific failure condition. Most players will go their entire time with these games without naturally hitting it. But in competitive contexts where HP percentages are tracked precisely, it came up occasionally, and when it did, the result was a Pokémon fainting from a move designed to protect it. Sleep in Generation 1 is worth discussing on its own, because it was genuinely unbalanced in a way that shaped early competitive Pokémon quite dramatically. When a Pokémon falls asleep in Gen I, the game rolls a single random check to determine how many turns it will stay asleep. The probability doesn't improve over time. In Gen I, you could be asleep for 1 turn or 7 turns, but the number of turns is fixed when sleep is inflicted, so the chance of waking on any given turn isn't the same. There's no increasing likelihood of recovery. This meant that with moves like Sleep Powder and Spore being widely available, accurate, and fairly easy to land, sleep dominated early competitive play. Put something to sleep, and it might stay asleep for the rest of the battle. The status condition bordered on unfair by later standards, and strategies built around it were genuinely hard to counter. Generation 2 kept sleep as a fixed length status, with the wake turn determined when the Pokémon fell asleep, rather than relying on an increasing chance to wake over time. Multi-turn trapping moves, Wrap, Bind, Clamp, were supposed to trap the opponent for 2 to 5 turns, while dealing a small amount of damage each round. What they actually did in Generation Y was trap the opponent completely. Not just can't switch out, can't do anything, no moves, no actions of any kind, just damage every turn until the effect ended. This made certain Pokémon, Dragonite with Wrap, Cloyster with Clamp, into matchup defining threats. Get caught in a trapping move, and the battle was often decided. Tournament play had to navigate around this quite carefully. The following generation changed partial trapping so the trapped Pokémon could still act. It just couldn't switch out. A much more reasonable compromise. The Mew glitch is more elaborate than most on this list, and it's genuinely impressive that players found it. On certain routes in Gen I, long-range trainers can spot you from a distance and walk over to battle. If you position yourself so one of these trainers is just off the edge of the screen, close enough to have noticed you, but not yet having started their walking animation, you can press start and open your menu in the gap. Using Fly from there takes you away before the trainer walk completes. The Mew glitch causes the game to lose the correct state after you use Fly to escape the trainer encounter. When you return to the area after winning another battle elsewhere, the game tries to load what encounter was interrupted, and instead loads a special encounter based on the last memory it read. With the right trainer and the right destination, this often produces a wild Mew at level 7. Mew was normally unobtainable in the games without a Nintendo event. The Mew glitch made it accessible to anyone who knew the steps. This also explains one of the most persistent Pokémon myths, the belief that Mew was hidden under the truck near the SS Anne in Vermilion City. The truck is real. Mew is not there. But the myth had just enough plausibility. Mew felt deliberately hidden. There was a story circulating about a way to get it, that it went around schoolyards for years before the internet could resolve it definitively. The Mew glitch was discovered and documented by players independently of any Game Freak communication. spread through early internet forums and game guides, and eventually became established knowledge. It's a good example of how the early Pokémon player community built its own body of technical knowledge around what the games were actually doing under the surface. By entering and exiting the Safari Zone in a specific way, you can trigger the game to load a corrupted overworld when you subsequently use Surf. Glitch City is what that corrupted overworld looks like. It's a jumble of tile graphics that don't correspond to any real location in the game. Walls in wrong places, floor tiles that should be water, collision detection that makes no sense. The background music plays normally. You can walk around. You're navigating through whatever the game happened to load into the map buffer from unrelated routines. If you try to enter a building, the experience deteriorates further, though it's generally not dangerous to your save file. It's a genuinely surreal few minutes of gameplay with no analogue anywhere else in the Pokémon series. After talking to the old man in Viridian City, the one who demonstrates how to catch Pokémon early in the game, if you fly directly to Cinnabar Island and surf along its eastern coast without visiting a Pokémon Center first, the encounter zone fills with Pokémon derived from your name data. This means wild encounters with normally rare Pokémon, Chansey, Kangaskhan, Snorlax, appearing on that coast. Wild encounters with the starter Pokémon you didn't choose. Wild encounters with Pokémon at implausibly high levels. None of it intended. It's the same underlying mechanism as Missing No, but pointed at real species identifiers rather than corrupted placeholders. Many players discovered this accidentally and had no idea what was happening or why. If two Ditto face each other and both use Transform, they each copy the other. Transform resets PP for each copied move to 5. Their entire moveset is now just Transform, with 5 PP each. They use Transform again. PP resets to 5. They use Transform again. PP resets to 5 again. The loop continues indefinitely. Neither can ever run out of PP. Neither can ever be forced into struggle. Neither can faint directly from PP exhaustion itself. The battle is technically endless. The main escape is switching out one of them, though a failed Transform can also break the loop. If both players are using Ditto and find the situation amusing enough, the match simply goes on. It's one of the stranger infinite loops in the history of competitive gaming. Rare candies raise a Pokémon's level by 1. In Generation Y, there's a level cap of 100, but the level value is stored as an 8-bit integer that wraps around when it exceeds 255. Using rare candies on a level 100 Pokémon in Gen I just caps out at level 100. It can overflow and produce a Pokémon at level 101, continuing past that toward level 255. These Pokémon have wildly distorted or broken stats depending on how the level data is interpreted. A level 255 Pokémon gaining any experience will trigger a level up that drops it to level 0, at which point things become considerably less predictable. This became relevant largely because of the item duplication glitch. Players with unlimited rare candies from Missing No eventually applied them past level 100 and discovered what happened. The answer was something, and nothing good. Somewhere in the game, an NPC mentions he's looking for a girl named Copycat who lives in Cerulean City. Copycat lives in Saffron City. These are different cities some distance apart. It's a writing error. A character's location was finalized differently from what an earlier piece of NPC dialogue assumed, and nobody updated the reference. The game never addresses it. Later remakes corrected it. Small but a satisfying one to spot if you happen to read every NPC's dialogue. Which, honestly, is a valid way to play these games. The opponent AI in Generation 1 follows a fairly simple pattern for selecting moves. It uses a set of hard-coded priority rules and then picks the move that scores best. What it sometimes does is switch Pokémon. Even when an opponent's Pokémon has a severe type disadvantage, even when its moves are doing 0 damage, the AI stays in and keeps attacking until it faints. Gym leaders do this. The Elite Four does this. Your rival does this. No one switches. This makes the game meaningfully easier than it might otherwise be, since you never have to account for an opponent recognizing a bad matchup and pivoting away from it. Once you understand how the AI works, you can anticipate every battle with some confidence. Small team, first game, enormous time pressure. These things happen, and honestly, knowing it makes the gym leaders feel a little less impressive in retrospect. The last mistake in this first generation is a fairly specific one involving the move Rage. Rage locks the user into using it repeatedly, with the user's attack increasing each time the user is hit. Under ordinary circumstances, this is a passive strategy with limited but real applications. The problem comes when two Pokémon end up locked into Rage simultaneously through certain battle mechanics. Both keep using Rage. Rage only uses PP on the first turn, so the loop never drains anyone's Rage PP. Neither can be forced out of the loop. The theoretical resolution is the 1 in 256 mischance from earlier. Eventually, across enough uses one might miss, depleting PP and forcing struggle. But the odds of that happening 20 times in a row are vanishingly small. The game's fix for this, implemented in yellow, was elegantly specific. Lorelei's Dugong in the Elite Four was given a special case that let it break out of the Rage loop, a targeted patch for one Pokémon rather than a systemic fix, very much in the spirit of how Gen I problems got solved. 15 mistakes, one generation, all shipped together in what became one of the best-selling game franchises in history. The bugs are inseparable from the games at this point. Since we're moving through the franchise in rough sections, let's look at the anime, specifically the original series that was running alongside all of this. The Pokémon anime started airing in Japan in April 1997, about a year after the games launched. It was produced primarily by OLM, Oriental Light and Magic, with different studios handling different aspects of production, sometimes episode by episode. Animation for a weekly series at that pace is inevitably rushed, and the errors that result are fairly standard fare for the format, but some of the mistakes in the original series are considerably larger than a miscoloured pixel. The most significant thing that went wrong in the history of the Pokémon anime, and quite possibly in the franchise generally, is episode 38. The episode, titled Denno Senshi Porygon, Electric Soldier Porygon in English, aired in Japan on December 16, 1997. It contained a sequence in which Pikachu deflects a series of missiles with Thunderbolt, creating a rapid strobing effect, intense flashes of red and blue alternating at high frequency for several seconds. Approximately 685 children were taken to hospital across Japan that evening, with symptoms including headaches, nausea, blurred vision, and photosensitive epileptic seizures. Additional children reported symptoms at home without seeking medical attention. Nintendo's share price fell. The anime went on a 4-month hiatus. The episode was pulled from broadcast immediately, has never been re-aired in any region, and has never been commercially released. The unfortunate footnote to all of this is what happened to Porygon. The episode is named after Porygon. Porygon is in the episode, but Porygon didn't cause the flashing effect. Pikachu did. Despite this, Porygon has been functionally blacklisted from the anime ever since, appearing only in a brief background moment in an intro sequence before that too was quietly removed. Porygon 2 and Porygon Z, added to the franchise in subsequent generations, have had almost no meaningful anime presence. They've never had their own episodes. It's a strange situation, all told. The Pokémon that did nothing wrong paid the longest lasting price. Episode 5 of the original series, Showdown in Pewter City, sees Ash challenge Brock at the Pewter City gym. Brock sends out Onix, rock and ground type. Ash has Pikachu. Pikachu is electric type. Electric moves don't work on ground types. There's a complete type immunity. In the episode, Pikachu's attacks visibly affect Onix. The electricity courses through it. The Pokémon reacts with pain. The resolution the writers landed on involved the gym's sprinkler system activating, soaking Onyx in water, at which point Brock conceded on compassionate grounds because his younger siblings were upset. The type immunity is never acknowledged or addressed. Brock's Geodude, also a ground type, takes electricity in the same episode with similar results. To be fair to the anime, the games hadn't been out long enough for viewers to have deeply internalized type matchups, and the episode's writers were probably more focused on characterizing Brock than on ruling accuracy. But the error is there. In the very first episode, a Pokémon battle depicted early in the runtime uses a Pokéball that is rendered green rather than red and white. It has never been explained. Multiple theories have circulated that it's a Safari Ball used in error, that all Pokéballs were originally going to be green, that a sponsorship arrangement influenced the design. The most commonly repeated story involves Coca-Cola, which has no documented basis and seems to have been invented by the internet. The simplest explanation is that it was a colouring error made under production pressure on the first episode, which had already broadcast before anyone processed it enough to flag it. The green ball appeared once and never again. In an early episode, visible on frame-by-frame analysis, Misty's eyes are drawn detached from her face, not slightly misaligned, floating visibly a few pixels to the side of where her head is. It lasts a fraction of a second. Almost certainly a compositing error. The face and eyes were on separate animation layers and weren't aligned correctly before the frame went out. What I find quietly interesting about this one is what it implies about how many similar micro errors might exist in the original series that simply haven't been found yet. The fact that this one was caught reflects how thoroughly the early episodes have been reviewed, frame by frame, by dedicated fans. There are probably others. When Jesse and James released their Pokémon in early episodes, the button on their Pokéballs, which sits on the red upper half of the ball and indicates the hinge and release mechanism, is occasionally placed on the white lower half instead. This is inconsistency across the animation team. Different artists drew the balls differently, and the quality check didn't catch every instance. It appears in several early episodes and is resolved in later ones. Small but worth including because the Pokéball is one of the most frequently depicted objects in the entire series. It's on screen constantly. The fact that its basic design was inconsistently drawn across production teams for a while is just part of what a weekly animated show's production reality looks like. During a Diamond and Pearl episode, Regaining the Home Advantage, there's a battle scene featuring Mamoswine and a wild Metagross. Ash and his companions are standing nearby watching the fight. In this scene, Pikachu can be seen simultaneously on Ash's shoulder and standing separately on the ground in front of him. Two Pikachus, one Ash, no explanation. Various fan theories have been proposed. The most popular involves the clone Pikachu from the first movie, which is quite a bit to infer from a background animation error. The simpler explanation is that the animators had a positioning reference layer of Pikachu on the ground, forgot to remove it before the final render, and quality review didn't catch it. The same scene has an issue where some of the characters' feet appear to be merging into the pavement slightly, which suggests this particular episode had a difficult production week. Throughout the original series, Ash's cap, red at the back, white on the face, red brim, stays the same colour. The brim goes white in certain episodes. The back changes shade. The structure of the cap varies between scenes. The most clear instance is in The Waterflowers of Cerulean City, where the brim of Ash's hat is unambiguously white for several seconds before reverting. It's not subtle. This is a production continuity issue. The series was produced across multiple studios, and character model guidelines weren't always followed consistently. Ash's cap is one of the most frequently reported continuity errors in the original series, precisely because it's on screen in nearly every episode. The more screen time a detail gets, the more opportunities there are for it to go wrong. Episode 18, Beauty and the Beach, was part of the original Japanese broadcast run. In this episode, James from Team Rocket enters a female swimsuit competition wearing inflatable prosthetic breasts, which he adjusts on camera. Misty reacts with outrage. The competition judges are impressed. 4Kids Entertainment, handling the English dub, declined to localise this episode for Western markets. It has never officially aired in the United Kingdom, Australia, or most Western regions, and it's absent from international home video releases, but it did air twice in the United States, in edited form. This creates a minor plot hole. Ash wins a beach race in the episode that's referenced later in the dub, but the reference has no context. That reference was smoothed over rather than removed. The episode sits in an odd middle ground. It's real and documented. Japanese viewers watched it, but it exists outside the experience of most international fans. Its absence from the Western canon has given it a mythologized status, known by description by people who have never seen it. The original series opening sequence contains a shot of various Pokémon in motion. Bulbasaur has its vines wrapped around Butterfree. Pidgeot is carrying Pikachu, and depending on the regional version, either Zubat or Beedrill appears to be carrying Squirtle through the air. Zubat has no hands. It has wings and a mouth, and nothing else of note in terms of appendages. How it is holding Squirtle is not clear from the animation. Squirtle is not a small Pokémon relative to Zubat. Beedrill's hands are stingers. The mechanics of Beedrill holding anything without impaling it are also unclear. In any case, something is carrying something in a way that doesn't hold up to scrutiny. The shot lasts about 2 seconds in the opening, which is probably why nobody flagged it before broadcast. The Trainer's Choice segment ran as a short interstitial during the Advanced Generation era of the anime, the Hoenn series, roughly 2003 to 2006. It asked viewers a type or strategy question and displayed a correct answer. In one Trainer's Choice segment, it asked what Seviper evolves from. The provided answer was that Seviper evolves from Arbok. Seviper does not evolve into anything. It is a standalone species with no evolutionary relatives. Arbok evolves from Ekans. It has no connection to Seviper. They're both serpentine Pokémon, which may be the extent of the association in the writer's mind. But the question, as framed, is entirely wrong on both counts. Wrong premise, Seviper doesn't evolve, and wrong answer, Arbok is not related to Seviper. The Trainer's Choice segment made several other errors across its run, recommending Torchic over Mudkip in situations where fire types have no advantage, among others. It was eventually discontinued. In the Johto arc, Ash is given the GS Ball, a mysterious golden and silver Pokeball that cannot be opened by any means. He's instructed to take it to Kurt, a specialist Pokeball researcher in Azalea Town, who is described as the most knowledgeable person in the world on unusual Pokeball designs. Ash delivers it, Kurt accepts it, Kurt says he'll study it and report back. That is the last time the GS Ball appears in the main anime series. There's no follow-up, no revelation, no callback. It simply vanishes from the narrative and is never acknowledged again. What was supposed to happen? The original plan had the GS Ball containing Celebi, with a storyline to follow. The plan was scrapped when Celebi was assigned as the focus of the 4th film, Pokémon Forever. Rather than retrofit the GS Ball plot into something else, the writers left it alone. The object that felt like it was being built towards something just stopped. It's one of the more famous dropped threads in long-running anime history. The GS Ball made a commitment to the audience. The audience noticed it wasn't kept. What makes the GS Ball slightly different from other dropped threads is the specificity of its setup. It wasn't a vague hint or an implied future story. It was a physical object Ash was explicitly tasked with delivering to a named person who was then supposed to investigate it. The task was completed. The ball was handed over. The investigation never happened. All the pieces were placed and then quietly removed. When Pikachu electrocutes Ash, which happens with some regularity, the show uses the standard cartoon shorthand of briefly showing the character's skeleton to indicate electrical discharge. It's a classic visual gag. The skeletons shown are not anatomically accurate. This might be a low bar for a children's animated show, and it probably is. But the skeletons that appear for Ash and Professor Oak have oddly proportioned rib cages, simplified spines that change between appearances, and skull shapes that shift depending on the episode. Given how often the gag occurs across the series, the inconsistency accumulated into something fans of anatomy notice. It is, admittedly, a cartoon. But the recurring nature of the gag means the inconsistency repeats. In an early episode, Officer Jenny, who uses a Growlithe as her police Pokémon, commands it with the words, "Arcanine, use Flamethrower." Growlithe is Arcanine's pre-evolution. Different Pokémon, different name. What makes this slightly interesting is that the command itself is valid. Growlithe can learn Flamethrower, so it could do the thing it was asked to do. The error is purely a name error. Either the actor was given incorrect dialogue, or the script used the wrong name, and nobody caught it before recording. Either way, the Pokémon's name got swapped for its evolution's name in the final product. Team Rocket's Meowth is distinctive because he's the talking, upright walking Meowth, a character whose entire arc involves being unusual among his own species, having learned human language and human posture as a way to try to fit in. In a small number of frames in very early episodes, Meowth is briefly drawn, moving on all fours like a standard Meowth. It lasts a frame or two. An animator drawing a Pokémon they'd seen in the games defaulted to the quadruped model without remembering this particular one was supposed to be different. It's a continuity error, and it's corrected quickly within the same episode. Small, but given that Meowth's upright walk is genuinely central to his characterization, it's the sort of thing that stands out on a close viewing. And the last one from the original series, Misty's bike. In the very first episode, Ash borrows, or takes, depending on how generously you read it, Misty's bicycle to outrun a flock of Spearow while trying to protect an injured Pikachu. The bicycle is caught in the electrical discharge when Pikachu fights off the Spearow. It is destroyed. Misty follows Ash on his journey, and the show explicitly frames this as partly motivated by the need to get compensation for the bike. This is stated openly and early. It's used to explain why she'd join a stranger she's just met. Over the course of the original series, this motivation quietly fades. There's no episode where the bike motivation is clearly resolved as a major plot point. By the end of the Indigo League, it just stops being mentioned. By the time the Johto arc is in full swing, Misty is simply part of the group, and the bike is forgotten. A late series callback brings it up briefly as a throwaway joke. The bike is never paid for. The situation is technically resolved when Nurse Joy gives Misty a new bike in the Bridge Bike Gang. It's a character motivation that the show built its early relationship dynamics around and then walked away from without comment. 30 mistakes in, and we've covered the original anime thoroughly. Let's take a turn now into something quite different, the trading card game and the rather interesting things that went wrong in it. The Pokémon trading card game launched in Japan in October 1996 and arrived in the West in 1998 under license to Wizards of the Coast, the company responsible for Magic: The Gathering. For the early English sets, Wizards handled printing and distribution, and the combination of enormous demand, rapid production cycles, and the translation and conversion process from Japanese produced some genuinely interesting errors. There's an unusual relationship between printing mistakes and value in card collecting. A defect in most products makes it worth less. A defect in a collectible, depending on rarity and circumstance, can make it worth considerably more. Several of the errors here are now actively sought by collectors, not despite the mistake, but because of it. The Jungle set was the second Pokémon expansion, released in 1999. Its set symbol, the small icon in the lower right corner of each card identifying which expansion it belongs to, was a flower, The initial unlimited print run of the jungle set went out without the flower symbol on any of the holographic rare cards. All 16 of them. Every holo rare in that first print run, Clefable, Electrode, Flareon, Jolton, Kangaskhan, Mr. Mime, Nidoqueen, Pidgeot, Pinsir, Scyther, Snorlax, Vaporeon, Venomoth, Victreebel, Vileplume, and Wigglytuff, left the factory with the symbol missing. Later print runs corrected this. The corrected versions are now the more common ones, which makes the error versions identifiable. A complete set of all 16 no-symbol jungle holos is a recognised collecting goal, and individual copies of the more popular Pokémon in high-grade command premiums. Not enormous premiums, these aren't particularly rare in absolute terms, but consistently identifiable and consistently sought. What's interesting about this error is its scale. It's not one card with a misprint, it's an entire print run of an entire subset of a set. 16 cards, all affected simultaneously, all leaving the facility the same way. Whatever step in the production process applied, the set symbol was simply skipped for that run, and nobody caught it until the cards were already packaged and shipped. The volume of cards that made it to market before the error was identified is part of why no-symbol jungle holos aren't dramatically rare today. There were quite a few of them, and they ended up in a lot of collections. Base set Ninetales has a move called Fire Blast. Fire Blast is supposed to deal 80 damage. On some printings of the Ninetales card, the 80 is missing. The attack line reads, Fire Blast with nothing after it. A card with an attack that deals no stated damage is technically unplayable as written. You'd need to know what the card was supposed to say and operate on trust. That's not a great situation in a competitive format. The error was corrected in later printings. The uncorrected version is a documented error card, identifiable in collections, and worth the same as the standard one. During the printing of the Jungle Set's pre-release card, which was Clefable, distributed at events before the set's retail release, something went wrong at the printing facility. A small number of base set Raichu cards were accidentally fed through the stamp process and received the pre-release stamp intended for Clefable. These cards allegedly made it into the hands of Wizards of the Coast employees rather than being destroyed. The public had no idea they existed until 2000, when a Tropical Mega Battle Tournament report mentioned them for the first time. The estimated count is somewhere between 8 and 11 confirmed copies, though the exact number is uncertain. Graded examples have appeared at auction for six-figure sums. It's among the most valued error cards in the hobby, and it exists entirely because a production line sent the wrong cards through the wrong stamping machine. What I find quietly interesting about the pre-release Raichu is that each surviving copy presumably has its own story about how it survived. Employees kept them, held onto them for years, perhaps not knowing their full significance at the time. The story of each individual card going from a printing floor to a collector's graded case is one we'll never fully know. The first edition Jungle Set's non-holo Electrode card was printed with the wrong artwork. Specifically, the first edition non-holo Jungle Electrode uses the artwork from the base set Electrode rather than the new Jungle-specific illustration. The Jungle Set was supposed to feature distinct artwork for its Pokémon. For Electrode, the original image was mistakenly substituted on the Jungle card. This applies specifically to first edition Jungle Electrode cards. If you have a first edition non-holo Jungle Electrode and compare it to a base set Electrode, they'll look identical. They shouldn't. The evolution box in the upper left corner of a Stage 1 Pokémon card shows which Pokémon it evolves from, a small image of the pre-evolution, so players can quickly identify the evolutionary chain. Some copies of the Wartortle card were printed with Wartortle's own image in that box, rather than a Squirtle. Someone used the wrong reference image during the card layout process, and it wasn't caught before printing. The result is a card that appears to evolve from itself, which is, to put it gently, not how that works. Blaine's Charizard from the Gym Heroes set has one of its attack costs printed with a fighting energy symbol rather than the correct fire energy symbol. Fighting energy, a fist, and fire energy, a flame, look different enough from each other that this should have been caught at review. On certain print runs it wasn't. The practical effect is that the card is technically unplayable as written. Fighting energy and fire energy are completely different resource types in the game, and the card asks for the wrong one. Dark Raichu from the Team Rocket set has text in its evolution box reading, "Put Raichu on the basic Pokémon." It should read, "Put Dark Raichu on the basic Pokémon." The word Darks, the prefix that defines the entire Team Rocket set's identity and distinguishes all of its cards from their standard counterparts, is absent from the evolution instruction. Given that Dark is the branding concept the whole set is built around, having it missing from one card's text is a notable oversight. A small one, functionally, but a symbolic one. A number of first edition holographic Hitmonlee cards from base set were printed with a vertical gold border ink stain on the left side of the card, a streak that runs from roughly midway down the card to near the bottom, covering the word "stretch" in its stretch kick attack. The stain comes from excess gold ink on the printing sheet that gradually depleted across the print run. Cards earlier in the run have more severe stains, later ones have less, until the excess ink was fully consumed. There's a similar but considerably rarer stain on first edition Haunter. The Hitmonlee version has been nicknamed Stainmonlee by collectors. Severe examples of the stain are specifically sought. The more dramatic the streak, the more unusual the copy. It's one of those errors that, properly documented and authenticated, becomes its own subcategory within an already niche area of the hobby. The printing process for the holographic cards involved the foil being applied in layers, and the gold border ink used on holo cards was applied as part of that process. The fact that this particular ink excess produced a vertical streak rather than a blotch or smear reflects the direction the sheet was travelling through the machine. It's a physical record of how the card was made, preserved in the card itself. There's something I find quite interesting about that. The error as a production artifact. Not a mistake in the design, not a mistake in the text, but a trace of a physical process going slightly wrong. The ink ran. The sheet moved through the machine. The card came out the other side, carrying evidence of both. All first edition and most unlimited holographic Zapdos cards from Fossil have a rectangular blank area in the upper left corner of the artwork. This is the space where an evolution box would normally sit, showing which Pokémon a Stage 1 or Stage 2 evolves from. Zapdos is a basic Pokémon. It doesn't evolve from anything. There should be no evolution box. On Zapdos, the blank area error comes from the holofoil being left out, where the usual evolution box would go, even though Zapdos is a basic Pokémon. The result is a rectangular dead zone in the holographic foil, a non-foil area where there should be foil, because that space was set aside for a box that has no reason to exist. A later unlimited print run filled this area with foil, correcting the error. PSA, the grading company, recognises the Zapdos evolution box misprint as an error, but does not consistently treat the error and corrected versions as fully separate entries. Both have collectors specifically looking for them. Rocket's Minefield Gym, from the Gym Challenge set, has an error in its effect description. It reads, "Put damage counters on that Pokémon," where it should read, "Put 2 damage counters." Without the number, the card's effect is genuinely ambiguous. How many damage counters? The card doesn't say, 1 presumably, or as many as you think is reasonable. The rules don't resolve this. At a tournament, a card that says, "Put damage counters," without specifying how many is functionally unplayable. You'd have to look up the intended text, which undermines the point of having the text on the card. Base set Vulpix was printed with its HP formatted as HP 50, the label first, the number second. Every other card in base set uses the format HP 50, the label first, the number second. This is not consistent across all the other base set Pokémon. Vulpix alone inverted it. It doesn't change what the card does. The information is the same either way. But it's out of step with every other card printed in the same set, which makes it identifiable and consistent as a documented error. The Pokémon, the first movie promotional cards, Mewtwo, Electabuzz, Pikachu and Dragonite, were stamped with a gold movie logo, stamp in the top right corner of the artwork. On a portion of the print run, the stamp is upside down and in the bottom left corner instead. An entire sheet's worth of cards received the inverted stamp before the error was caught and the run was halted. These cards have appeared on the collector market periodically since then and command significant premiums over the standard versions. All 4 Pokémon in the promo set have the error version documented. The mistake affected an entire sheet simultaneously. Every card printed in that particular run, all 4 subjects, which makes the distribution across all 4 Pokémon a notable detail. A single misalignment in the stamping apparatus, 1 sheet through the machine, 4 different Pokémon affected. 12 TCG mistakes across a period of roughly 5 years. The Wizards of the Coast era of the Pokémon TCG was a time of extraordinary demand and relatively fast production, and the errors that resulted from that combination have become part of the collecting landscape. There's a broader observation worth making here. Many of these errors weren't caught because the volume being produced was simply too large for thorough individual inspection. Printing millions of cards means that the quality check process is necessarily sampling based. If an error exists across a full print run, it's likely to be discovered. If it exists across a single sheet or a handful of copies, it may well reach collectors before anyone at the production facility notices. The TCG error collecting community has become quite sophisticated about this over time. There are dedicated forums and grading guides for error cards, and auction houses that regularly handle high-value Pokémon TCG cards, including error cards. The PSA Error Guide documents dozens of known variations across the early sets. And since new sets continue to be printed at high volume, new errors continue to emerge, sometimes discovered years after the set's release, when a collector notices something unusual in a card they've had for a long time. Now let's go back to the games and look at what happened in the 3 generations that followed the original. Generation 2 tried to fix a lot of what was wrong with Generation 1. It succeeded in many respects. Sleep was reworked, type matchups were tightened, held items were added, breeding was introduced, and the game world expanded significantly. But fixing some problems introduced others, and some existing issues turned out to be more stubborn than expected. 3 generations worth of games here. Let's go through them. In Pokémon Gold and Silver, the mechanics tell you that inflicting status conditions on a wild Pokémon makes it easier to catch. Put it to sleep, or paralyze it before throwing a Pokéball, and your odds improve. What actually happens in the code is that status conditions do affect the catch rate calculation. The catch rate formula in Generation 2 simply does factor in status. The modifier that should be there is actually applied. Paralysis, sleep, burn, freeze, poison, all of them help. This had real consequences for players pursuing the 3 roaming legendary beasts, Raikou, Entei, and Suicune, which were already notoriously difficult to catch because of their habit of fleeing on their first turn. Players carefully putting them to sleep before throwing Master Balls were getting no benefit for the Master Ball itself, though sleep still helped with other balls in Generation 2. The difficulty was genuine, but the in-game suggestion that status conditions would help was for this generation correct, fixed in Generation 3. By depositing a Pokémon into the PC box just as the game begins its save process, then restarting the game before saving completes, the Pokémon appears in both your party and the PC box when you reload. The timing window is narrow. On physical cartridges, it requires a fairly precise interruption of the save sequence. But it works, and it allows duplication of any Pokémon, including starters, legendaries, and species that would otherwise require specific events to obtain. This became well known fairly quickly after the game's release, and was used by players who wanted multiple copies of their favourite Pokémon without trading. The elegance of the exploit is that it doesn't require any external tools, just knowledge of when to switch the game off. The cloning glitch occupies a curious place in the culture around these games. Unlike some Gen I glitches that produced corrupted or unpredictable results, the cloning glitch in Gold and Silver was precise and reliable. It did exactly what it appeared to do: produce a duplicate. Players who used it weren't doing so recklessly. They were getting a second copy of a Pokémon they'd already obtained through normal play. Whether that constitutes a meaningful form of cheating was a question players argued about then, and occasionally still do. In the Western releases of Pokémon Gold and Silver, the GS Ball, which carried significant plot weight in the anime simultaneously airing during this era, does not exist as an obtainable item. In Japan, the GS Ball was distributed via the Pokémon Mobile System GB, a regional connectivity service. The event triggered a storyline involving Kerr in Azalea Town, and ultimately a Celebi encounter in Ilex Forest. In Western territories, where the mobile service wasn't released, no distribution method was ever made available. The GS Ball event remained locked in the game's code, inaccessible. Celebi was obtained in the West for years only through hacking, transferring from real-life Western event distributions, or by using the Japanese Pokémon Colosseum bonus disc for Generation 3rd. The GS Ball itself wasn't accessible to Western players in Gold and Silver at all. When Pokémon Crystal was re-released on the Nintendo 3DS Virtual Console in 2018, the event was finally activated, about 17 years after the original release. For many players, it was their first legitimate opportunity to experience the storyline the anime had been building around. Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire run on an internal clock. The game tracks real time to power berry growth, daily events, and other time-dependent mechanics. After roughly a year of normal use, that internal clock overflows and resets. When it does, all time-dependent events stop working. Berries stop growing, scheduled events don't trigger, the clock runs wrong. Nintendo eventually distributed a berry glitch fix program via special e-reader cards and GameCube demo discs in Japan, and through later GameCube and GBA titles elsewhere, to correct affected cartridges. The fix was available, but players had to know to seek it out. The glitch primarily hit dedicated players who had been playing the games long enough for the timer to overflow, which meant the players most invested in time-dependent mechanics were the ones most likely to be affected. The move Pomeg Berry in Pokémon Emerald reduces a Pokémon's HP-related effort values, which can lower its maximum HP stat. On an ordinary Pokémon, this just adjusts the stat modestly, but on a Pokémon that already has very few HP EVs, or one that's already at very low HP, repeated Pomeg Berry use can produce a Pokémon with negative HP. A Pokémon at 0 HP is technically in a fainted state, but it's in your party. Sending a fainted Pokémon into battle from the party triggers a cascade of unintended behaviours. Battles can start with a fainting Pokémon. Battles can sometimes be won in unusual ways, and the game enters states it wasn't designed to handle. It's an exploit more than a simple bug. But the underlying cause is a design oversight in how the berries effect interacted with very low HP values. The English version 1.0 of Pokémon Fire Red and Leaf Green had a Pokédex display error. If a Pokémon's category name contained more than one word, the Pokédex would only show the first word. Beedrill's category is Poison Bee Pokémon. In version 1.0, it displays as Poison Pokémon. The game interpreted the space between words as a text terminator and cut everything after it. This is listed as affecting the English release specifically, corrected in the 1.1 version, distributed in the Player's Choice re-release. Pokémon with one-word categories were unaffected. It only manifested for multi-word categories, which is why it could easily go unnoticed on a casual playthrough. There's an NPC in the original Red and Blue who mentions he's shopping for a gift for a girl named Copycat who lives in Cerulean City. Copycat actually lives in Saffron City. This particular continuity error persisted as a topic of discussion because Fire Red and Leaf Green, the remakes released in 2004, are set in the same Kanto region. The remakes did update the dialogue in question, but the original error existed long enough that dedicated players had noted it across multiple generations. It's a small thing. A writer noted the wrong city, nobody caught it before the original release, and it ended up in the game. The kind of error that's entirely unremarkable in isolation, but becomes slightly charming once you know to look for it. In the original Pokémon Red and Blue, your rival Blue's Dragonite at the champion fight knows the move barrier, a normal type status move that raises the user's defense stat. Dragonite can only learn barrier legitimately via a special event distribution in Generation 6. No level up, no TM, no breeding. The move simply isn't available to Dragonite through normal legitimate means. Aside from a special event, Lance's Dragonite that can legally have it as a transfer-only move. In the games, this went largely unnoticed because barrier on a Dragonite is, functionally, irrelevant to whether you win or lose. It doesn't change the matchup in any meaningful way, but it's there. A Dragonite with barrier was officially distributed through a Generation 6 global link event, meaning it became technically possible to have a legitimate Dragonite with barrier in later games through a long chain of mechanics. But in the original Red and Blue, Lance's Dragonite simply had a move it had no business knowing. Trainer AI throughout the early generations of Pokémon games follows fairly straightforward logic for move selection. In Generation 1 and into Generation 2 and 3, this logic sometimes produced opponents using moves that had no effect against the player's Pokémon. Lil T Surge's Electric-type Pokémon will use Electric-type moves against Ground-type Pokémon for zero effect, rather than switching or selecting a different move. Water Gym leaders occasionally make similar errors. The AI evaluates move power but doesn't consistently account for type immunity. This persisted well into the GBA era. Cool Trainer Diane in Pokémon Emerald has a Lantern that knows Earthquake, a move Lantern cannot legitimately learn, and will attempt to use it in battle. The implication is that some NPC movesets were simply not checked against their Pokémon's actual learn sets. In Pokémon Diamond and Pearl, the post-game location Send-Off Spring has a peculiar interaction involving the bicycle. If you arrive at Send-Off Spring and proceed to get on and off your bicycle a specific number of times, it's around 6 or 7 from what players established, the background music simply stops. What remains is near silence with only ambient sound effects. There's no in-game trigger for this. It's a bug in how the music state is tracked when the bicycle is toggled, and this particular location is somehow more susceptible to it than others. Send-Off Spring is already a fairly quiet, isolated place in the game. The area has an eerie, reflective quality by design. Accidentally silencing the music there, presumably, produces a somewhat different atmosphere from what was intended. Not worse necessarily, just different. The Pokewalker came bundled with Pokémon Heart Gold and Soul Silver, a small pedometer device that let you take a Pokémon for walks in your pocket, earning watts that could be exchanged for items or used to encounter rare Pokémon. If the Pokewalker's battery died while a Pokémon was being carried inside it, steps data could be lost. In certain failure states, the Pokémon being carried would become inaccessible until the device was reset, and resetting it would also wipe all stored data, including the steps already accumulated. This was a hardware meets software interaction that players discovered the hard way. The Pokewalker was a charming peripheral that worked well under normal conditions. Dead batteries under normal conditions are not unusual. The interaction between those two facts was unfortunate. In Pokémon Diamond, Pearl and Platinum, there's a fully programmed event involving an item called the Azure Flute. In this event, the player climbs to the top of Spear Pillar and plays the Azure Flute. A golden staircase appears, leading to a battle with Arceus at level 80. The Azure Flute was first officially distributed in Pokémon Legends, Arceus, and in Pokémon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. It was not distributed in any region for Pokémon Diamond, Pearl, or Platinum. It was never distributed in the Generation 4 games. The Azure Flute event exists in the game's code, but it was never officially released. Players data mined it and documented it in detail in Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. Game Freak's explanation, offered years later, was that they felt the encounter was too difficult for players to understand without additional narrative context, and they chose not to deploy the item. Arceus was eventually made available through other distribution events, but the Azure Flute event specifically remains locked in the game, waiting for a trigger that was never sent. An entire scripted sequence, developed and completed, sitting unused in the code of games that sold millions of copies. There's something poignant about that, I think. The staircase exists, the music presumably exists. The level 80 Arceus encounter is there, coded and ready, triggered by an item that no one on Earth legitimately owns in Diamond, Pearl, or Platinum. The void glitch in Diamond and Pearl allowed players to reach the Hall of Origin through the game's back door, but that's a different route to a different version of the event. The Azure Flute Arceus encounter specifically, the one with the flute and the staircase and the proper in-game context, exists in a completed state, in Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, that nobody was ever supposed to see. Starting in Generation 2, certain Pokémon evolve when their friendship stat reaches a high enough value. The system has existed across the franchise for more than 25 years. The friendship stat has never been displayed as a number to the player in any mainline game. There are NPCs who will assess your Pokémon's friendship and give you a qualitative description. Your Pokémon seems to really like you. It looks at you with a lot of trust. These descriptions map onto rough numerical ranges, but the exact value has never been shown. For evolutions like Espeon, Umbreon, Chansey's evolution to Blissey, and others, this means players are perpetually estimating whether they're close enough. The affection stat, introduced in Generation 6 as a separate mechanic, added another layer of ambiguity. It's been a consistent source of mild frustration for dedicated players for a very long time. Not a glitch exactly, more of a design choice that never quite resolved. Pokémon Diamond and Pearl introduced a post-game location called the Send-Off Spring Area, accessible after beating the Elite Four. The same games had an accessible void under the map, reachable through a fairly famous exploit. By exploiting the transition animation when moving near certain map boundaries at high speed, players discovered they could slide out of the playable area entirely. From there, the game's map data continues in a technical sense. There's geography being generated from existing map and RAM data, but it's not connected to any intended player-accessible content. Navigating through this void allowed players to reach the Hall of Origin, a normally inaccessible event location that appears to be connected to the Azure Flute Arceus encounter from Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. Players who reached it via the void could, under specific conditions, encounter Arceus in a normal battle. It's one of the more elaborate game boundary exploits in the series, and it's uncovered content that wasn't supposed to be reachable. Victini, a mythical Pokémon introduced in Black and White, which is actually Generation Phi, so we'll be revisiting it in the next section, has an interesting Pokédex numbering situation worth mentioning here as a bridge thought. Victini itself is one of the first mythical Pokémon to break the pattern of simply being placed at the end of the main National Pokédex sequence, and the tradition of mythical Pokémon having unusual placement in regional Pokédexes became something players tracked carefully across generations. We'll come back to Victini specifically when we get to Generation Phi. And one final note for this section, Phione. Phione is a small sea Pokémon obtained by breeding Manaphy, itself a mythical Pokémon, at the daycare. The game classifies Phione as mythical. the same category as Mew, Celebi, and Manaphy itself. But unlike every other mythical Pokémon, Phione is the only Pokémon that is obtainable by breeding a mythical Pokémon in standard gameplay, meaning it can be obtained without any direct Phione event distribution. This created years of confusion about Phione's official status. A Pokémon classified as mythical should, by the logic of every other mythical, be unobtainable through normal means. Phione is obtainable through normal means repeatedly. Its mythical designation was disputed in fan communities for a long time, and official clarification on its exact status was slow to arrive and somewhat unclear when it did. It's a category error, a Pokémon placed in a designation that its obtainability method directly contradicts. 18 mistakes from 3 generations of games. The franchise was growing rapidly, adding features and complexity with each generation, and some of those additions created friction with systems that were already there. Now let's move back to the anime and look at what happened as the show followed the games into Johto, Hoenn, and Sinnoh. By the time the anime moved into Johto and then Hoenn, it was a well-established institution. New games were being produced, new regions were being animated, and the cast of Pokémon was growing considerably. The show had its rhythms and its conventions, and those conventions sometimes produced their own categories of error. Not just animation mistakes, but continuity failures that accumulated across multiple seasons. In the Johto arc and beyond, whenever characters ate rice balls, onigiri, a common Japanese snack, the 4Kids Entertainment English dub renamed them as jelly donuts, or in some instances, sandwiches. The most cited example, Brock holds up a triangular rice ball wrapped in seaweed and announces it's a jelly donut. It does not look like a jelly donut, it looks like a rice ball because it is a rice ball. 4Kids' reasoning was that American children wouldn't recognize onigiri. This is, on its own terms, a defensible assumption for 1998 or 1999. The problem is that renaming the food doesn't change the animation, and the resulting mismatch, a character holding a visibly non-donut-shaped object and calling it a jelly donut, was noticeable enough that it became a running cultural reference. It wasn't a subtle edit. 4Kids made a number of similar adjustments throughout their tenure with the dub, altering character names, removing references to death, adjusting cultural specifics they felt Western audiences wouldn't connect with. Most of these edits passed without the visual evidence contradicting them. The rice ball situation became the most famous because it was the most immediately visible. The shape of onigiri is quite distinct from the shape of a donut, and no amount of voice dubbing changes what's on screen. After Charmeleon evolved into Charizard, Ash's Charizard stopped obeying commands entirely. It slept through battles, ignored instructions, and only participated on its own terms. This is internally consistent with the game mechanic that a Pokémon above a certain level won't obey a trainer who doesn't have enough badges. The game models this, and the anime adapted the concept. The problem is what happened when Ash collected enough badges. In the games, once you have sufficient badges, any Pokémon will obey you regardless of level. The in-show equivalent should have resolved Charizard's disobedience at some point during the second half of the original series. It doesn't. The disobedience continues past the point where it should mechanically have stopped, driven by plot needs rather than established logic. The resolution that eventually came in the Orange Islands arc, where Charizard chose to keep fighting after being near frozen, works emotionally, but doesn't quite explain what changed or why the mechanics didn't apply earlier. The disobedience arc lasted longer than the rules of the show's own world allowed for. What makes it interesting rather than just frustrating is that Charizard's disobedience arc is one of the original series' most beloved storylines. The eventual moment where Charizard starts listening again has genuine emotional weight. The show made something that worked dramatically out of a situation that doesn't hold up mechanically, which is a reasonable trade-off for a piece of character-driven storytelling. But it does mean that the show's own internal logic was quietly set aside in the service of that arc, and nobody ever addressed the gap. Duplica's Ditto, introduced in Ditto's Mysterious Mansion, has a specific limitation. When it transforms into other Pokémon, it can't replicate their faces accurately. It keeps its own blank, dot-eyed Ditto expression, regardless of what it's copying. In the episode Ditto's Mysterious Mansion, this is acknowledged, and the storyline centers on Duplica's Ditto struggling with this limitation and ultimately overcoming it. At the end of the episode, Ditto succeeds. It transforms correctly, face included, and the problem is resolved. Duplica returns in a later episode. Her Ditto's face issue is not mentioned. It seems to be entirely forgotten that Ditto had previously struggled with this, and the previous episode's resolution, which was presented as a meaningful character moment, simply doesn't carry forward. Continuity in long-running anime is difficult to maintain. This is a particularly clear example of a self-contained resolution that the show's own continuity didn't honour. Beyond the Seviper evolves into Arbok era mentioned earlier, the Trainer's Choice segment made multiple factually incorrect recommendations across its run. In one instance, it recommended Torchic over Mudkip against a Geodude. Torchic is a fire type with no particular advantage over Geodude, rock ground, while Mudkip, water type, would be more straightforwardly effective. In another, Caterpie was recommended in a context that didn't support the choice. The segment appeared to be written without consistent fact-checking against the type chart. Given that it was designed as an interactive segment to test viewers' knowledge about type matchups during battles, producing incorrect information is a meaningful failure. When it was discontinued, there was no announcement or explanation. It simply stopped appearing when Pokémon USA and TRJ Productions took over dubbing. Brock's character design features almost always closed, squinting eyes. It's one of his most immediately recognizable visual traits, and it's maintained consistently across thousands of episodes. In a small number of frames scattered across the series, Brock's eyes appear fully open, revealing pupils that don't fit his established design. These are frame-level errors. An animator drawing Brock in motion may have sketched open eyes as a reference before applying the character's distinctive design on top, or simply missed the detail during a busy production schedule. Each instance lasts a frame or two. It's easy to find if you're looking at paused frames. Essentially invisible at normal playback speed, the kind of thing that only becomes part of the record because of how thoroughly these episodes have been reviewed. Togepi, Misty's egg-shaped companion Pokémon, is treated throughout the original and Johto series as more or less helpless and comedic, unable to battle, prone to falling asleep at inconvenient moments, primarily a cute presence. In at least 2 episodes, Togepi uses Metronome, a move that randomly selects any other move in the game at a critical moment, and the result is presented as Togepi heroically saving the day. In most of the episodes where Togepi uses Metronome, the specific move selected is not verbally highlighted. The suggestion is that Metronome landed on something useful. The mistake isn't that Togepi saves the day, it's that these moments establish Togepi as capable in a way the show then consistently ignores. In essentially every other episode, Togepi is shown as helpless and non-combative. The metronome moments exist as emotional peaks that the show doesn't integrate into Togepi's characterization. In the Orange Islands arc, Ash encounters a young Lapras separated from its pod and becomes its trainer for the duration of the arc. Lapras serves as the group's primary water transport across the Orange Islands. When the arc ends, Ash releases Lapras to rejoin its family in an emotional, well-staged farewell. Lapras is later mentioned and seen again in the main series in the Johto episode Lapras of Luxury after the Orange Islands arc. For a Pokémon that was Ash's primary companion for an entire arc, received a significant goodbye and clearly occupied an emotional role in the show, the total absence of any subsequent reference is notable. At least one later episode checks in on Lapras. There's barely any mention of Lapras in the Johto seasons that follow immediately after the Orange Islands arc. It's treated as more conclusively over than most of Ash's released Pokémon. Team Rocket is sent blasting off in what appears to be the same manner, Pikachu's Thunderbolt, or a similar move, followed by a "we're blasting off again" in the dub, in hundreds of episodes across the original series and beyond. They always return in the next episode, fully healed and operationally ready. The show never explains how they survive, where they land, or how they get back. There are specific episodes where they fall from significant heights into water or visible hard ground, or are shown travelling from distances that shouldn't allow them to arrive in time for the next confrontation. The joke is that they're indestructible through cartoon logic, and the show leans into that. What makes it a genuine continuity error rather than just a stylistic choice is that the series occasionally tries to anchor Team Rocket in real-world logic. They have a headquarters, they answer to a boss, they have genuine plans and resources, they file reports, they have expense accounts implied at various points. Giovanni only rarely treats them as real agents with real accountability. That semi-realistic framing makes the immortality more visible when it comes up. There are also specific episodes where Team Rocket's blast-off landing is shown. They land in a field or in a lake, and those episodes create retroactive questions about all the other times we didn't see where they ended up. If they sometimes land in a field and walk away, that means there's a walk back every time, which is a lot of walking. The Pokédex entries read by Ash's device in the anime frequently diverge from game lore and from basic biology. The Tentacool entry in Tentacool and Tentacruel states that 99% of its body is made up of water, an entry that also appears in the games, but in the anime becomes conspicuous when Tentacool proceeds to have a variety of solid-seeming physical structures and abilities. If 99% of something is water, the remaining 1% is doing a lot of work. Various other Pokédex entries throughout the franchise describe abilities that would make the Pokémon in question genuinely dangerous to encounter. Gengar's entries about stealing body warmth and cursing people, Cuboni's extremely dark backstory becoming a matter-of-fact recitation. The anime Pokédex seems to operate from a different document than the games, with entries that were written independently across different episodes. What's interesting about the Pokédex entry situation is that the games themselves have similar inconsistencies. Pokédex entries in the mainline games are often contradictory between generations, describing the same Pokémon very differently from one game to the next. Gengar's entries have described it as, variously, a reformed Clefable, a popular fan theory, not confirmed in games, a creature that lurks in shadows, stealing the lives of its prey, and a being that causes a deadly chill when it draws near. These don't quite cohere with each other. The anime just made the incoherence more visible by reading the entries aloud in story context, which invited scrutiny the game's text screens perhaps didn't. In the XY series, which is slightly outside this section's scope but relevant here as a comparison, Ash's Greninja developed a bond phenomenon that created Ash Greninja, a form unique to this specific Pokémon's bond with this specific trainer. Across the Johto and Hoenn anime arcs, Ash builds close bonds with Charizard, Lapras, and his Johto starters that are established as meaningful and generally given clear emotional resolution. The pattern repeats consistently. The Ash Greninja situation in XY is the most formally developed version of this pattern, a mechanic literally built into the show's world to represent a unique bond, which is then left behind when the arc ends and Greninja is written out. We'll come back to it in the next section on Gen V and Vec. During the Diamond and Pearl series, the show attempted to more seriously engage with battles and competitive strategy. This produced some excellent episodes, and also produced the double Pikachu moment we covered earlier. It also produced an episode in which Ash uses Bulbasaur's Vine Whip, but the attack animation depicts what is clearly Razor Leaf instead. This is a dub-era continuity error that may originate in how the battle was storyboarded versus how it was animated, or simply in a script note that referenced the wrong move name. The result is a visual and audio mismatch. The dialogue calls for one move, while the animation shows another. Last one for this section, Officer Jenny's Growlithe. We touched on this in the original series section, Jenny calling Growlithe by Arcanine's name. What's worth noting is that variations of this error appear in multiple episodes across different arcs. Officer Jenny appears in different cities throughout the anime, using Growlithe as her police Pokémon. In a handful of these appearances across different seasons, her Pokémon's name gets used incorrectly or inconsistently. This points to a systemic issue. The character travels and appears across many episodes, written by different writers, and the consistency of her Pokémon's name wasn't always maintained in the script. A recurring character's recurring Pokémon having recurring name errors is a slightly different kind of mistake than a one-off, in that it reflects how the writing room handled continuity for supporting characters who appeared often. There's something almost appropriate about it. Officer Jenny herself is a recurring character who appears in different cities and is treated as interchangeable across the anime, with the in-universe explanation being that she's one of many identical cousins. Perhaps the Pokémon's name getting shuffled around reflects a similar kind of creative interchangeability in how the writers thought about the character. 12 mistakes from the middle anime era. The show accumulated continuity across a long run, and that accumulation is where a lot of these issues originate. Let's go back to the games and look at Generation V and Generation 6. Generation V is often praised as the generation with the strongest narrative, the most story investment, the most memorable supporting cast, the most thematic ambition. Generation 6 marked the move to full 3D, which brought visual possibilities that hadn't previously existed. Both generations introduced their own categories of error, some mechanical and some in the gap between what was promised and what arrived. Victini, a mythical Pokémon introduced in Pokémon Black and White, is registered in the Unova Regional Pokédex as entry number Sowejuaro. It's the only time this has happened. Every other regional Pokédex, including every other one that features mythical Pokémon, starts at 001. Victini, as a mythical Pokémon, comes before the starter Pokémon in the regional listing, sitting at 0 while Snivy begins the main sequence at 001. Game Freak has officially explained why Victini is listed as Pokédex Entry 0. The regional Pokédexes for Generation 6 onward return to the 001 convention without comment. Theories range from deliberate symbolism, Victini represents infinite possibility, and 0 implies a cyclic quality, to simple oversight in the numbering during development. The ambiguity has persisted, but an official in-game explanation for Victini's Wardero Pokédex entry has since been given. During the Johto arc, Ash carries and eventually delivers the GS ball to Kurt, and the plot goes nowhere, as we discussed. The games tell a parallel story. In Pokémon Black and White's development, certain planned distribution events for mythical Pokémon were quietly shelved or delayed to the point of functional cancellation. The Liberty Pass for Victini was distributed through a downloadable Wi-Fi event to mark Black and White's launch. But the system of timed limited distribution for mythical Pokémon, events that close after a set window, making certain Pokémon permanently unavailable to anyone who missed the period, remained a structural issue throughout these generations. Pokémon Genesect, Meloetta, Keldeo, and others were distributed through events that players in certain regions had unequal access to. The game's Pokédex would show empty silhouettes of Pokémon the player had no legitimate means of obtaining, which is a distinctive kind of frustration. Pokémon Black and White introduced translation timing issues when launching across different regions. The game launched in Japan in September 2010 and reached Western territories in March 2011. During that gap, 6 months of Japanese players naming things before the English names were finalized, certain Pokémon names changed between the fan-translated previews and the official localization. Some of those early fan names had already circulated widely enough that the official names felt slightly wrong to people who'd been following closely. It's the kind of confusion that doesn't affect the game at all, and yet somehow manages to feel genuinely annoying if you were in the habit of reading coverage before a game released. The Pokémon is called what it's called. The preview you bookmarked called it something slightly different. These two facts coexist uncomfortably for a while. Pokémon X and Y launched in October 2013, the first mainline games to release worldwide on the same day, and the first to feature fully 3D gameplay. At launch, they had a significant bug. Saving the game in specific outdoor areas of Lumiose City, the game's central hub, would corrupt the save file. The game would load to a black screen and freeze. Nintendo issued an official warning shortly after launch, advising players not to save in the affected areas. A patch was released relatively quickly, but not before a number of players experienced corrupted saves, losing whatever progress they'd made. For a game that launched on the same day worldwide, producing a launch day save corruption bug in a major city was a notable quality assurance failure. The E3 2013 announcement trailer for Pokémon X and Y, the trailer that introduced the world to Generation 6, showed a Gardevoir using the move Fairy Wind. In the final game, Gardevoir cannot learn Fairy Wind by any means. Fairy Wind was a newly introduced move, part of the new Fairy type that X and Y were introducing. Gardevoir was being reclassified in this generation from pure Psychic to Psychic Fairy, making it a natural candidate for Fairy-type moves. It's plausible that Gardevoir was originally intended to be able to learn Fairy Wind, and the decision was reversed before the game shipped. The move exists in the final game. It's just not available to Gardevoir. The trailer was seen by millions of players. The game shipped without the move. Nobody has ever officially explained the discrepancy. Wonder Trade, introduced in X and Y, lets players send a Pokémon and receive a random one from another player worldwide. It was presented as a way to connect with players globally and potentially obtain Pokémon you wouldn't otherwise have. Within days of X and Y's launch, Wonder Trade was heavily populated with hacked Pokémon, Lovedisk and Smeargle at level 1 with impossible move combinations, Pokémon with altered stats, things that couldn't be produced through any legitimate in-game method. Nintendo had no robust filter for detecting hacked Pokémon in online trade at this stage. Players who received badly glitched hacked Pokémon into their games sometimes found that keeping them created issues with compatibility in later online trades. The phenomenon became a cultural shorthand for the risks of anonymous online trading in games without strong verification. The most commonly traded junk Pokémon, Lovedisk, was a particular favourite, became synonymous with the experience of Wonder Trade disappointment. Getting a Lovedisk on Wonder Trade entered the vocabulary as a shorthand for receiving something low effort or impractical. The system improved in later generations as detection and filtering became better, and the community around Wonder Trade developed its own informal norms, trading reasonable Pokémon, occasionally organising events where players would trade valuable or rare species as a kind of good faith effort to improve the experience. But the X and Y launch established the problem clearly, and the meme of the Lovedisk as the Wonder Trade currency persisted well beyond when it was actually accurate. Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire are remakes of Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire from 2002, released in 2014. Pokémon Emerald, the third game in the Ruby Sapphire generation, added a substantial post-game facility called the Battle Frontier, featuring 7 different battle arenas with distinct rules and challenges. Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire did not include the Battle Frontier. They included the simpler Battle Maison from X and Y. The Battle Frontier widely considered one of the strongest post-game offerings in the series' history, was absent from the remakes of the games it had been added to. Game Freak producer Junichi Masuda addressed this in an interview, suggesting that modern players didn't have the time to engage deeply with the Battle Frontiers challenges. This explanation landed poorly with fans, many of whom felt the Battle Frontier was specifically valuable for the depth it offered. What made it worse, the games contain an in-game tease where a character mentions that a Battle Frontier might someday be built in the region. A joke or a hope, it was received as the former by most players. There's also the broader context here. Auras are remakes of Ruby and Sapphire, not Emerald, so the argument could be made that they weren't obligated to include Emerald content at all. But the games did include other Emerald-era improvements, the Pokémon contest upgrades, certain storyline elements, making the Battle Frontier's specific absence feel more deliberate and more difficult to fully explain on those grounds. It remains one of the more discussed missing features in the history of mainline Pokémon remakes. The Pokémon Bank launched in Japan in December 2013 as a cloud storage service, a way to hold Pokémon between games and move them across generations. It severely disrupted Nintendo servers shortly after its launch in Japan. The demand was significantly higher than the servers could handle. The service was delayed for Western regions into February 2014, while the infrastructure issues were resolved. Players who tried to pay for the service's annual fee couldn't use it for weeks after its original planned launch date. The delay was eventually managed, and Pokémon Bank functioned well for most of its operational life, but the launch itself was a straightforward case of infrastructure not being prepared for demand. The Fairy type, introduced in Generation 6, required reclassifying a number of existing Pokémon. Clefairy went from normal to pure Fairy. Jigglypuff went from normal to normal Fairy. Snubbull changed from normal to Fairy. Several others shifted. The in-game lore made no effort to explain why these changes occurred between generations. Pokémon that had been one type in every previous game were simply a different type in Generation 6, with no narrative acknowledgement. Some Pokédex entries from earlier games referenced their old type classifications in ways that no longer made sense under the new system. Clefairy's entries in Gen I through V describe it as a normal type, and those entries were written with that type in mind. But as of Gen 6, Clefairy is Fairy type without any in-universe event having occurred. It's less a single mistake and more a category of small inconsistencies that opened up when a significant type change was applied to the existing Pokédex without accompanying lore revision. From a design perspective, the decision to reclassify existing Pokémon makes a lot of sense. Clefairy, Jigglypuff and Marill, for example, feel thematically like Fairy types, and the reclassification made the new type feel inhabited rather than empty on arrival. But the execution created these seams between the older lore and the current typing system. No single Pokémon demonstrates the issue dramatically on its own. It's the accumulation of dozens of small mismatches across the Pokédex that makes it visible as a systemic issue. In Pokémon Sun and Moon, just at the border between this section and the modern era, there's a brief animation error during evolution sequences. For a fraction of a second before the evolution animation begins, a dark silhouette of the evolved form flickers in the corner of the screen. It's essentially invisible at normal playback speed. Frame-by-frame analysis revealed it clearly. The likely explanation is that the game preloads the evolved Pokémon's model before the transition animation hides the load screen, and the model briefly renders before the visual effect covers it. For players who like to enjoy the surprise of seeing their Pokémon's evolution for the first time, this is technically a spoiler delivered by a rendering artifact. During the Generation 6 era, the friendship mechanic, described back in the Generation 2 section, gained a second companion system called Pokémon Army, later Pokémon Refresh, which tracked a separate affection value through minigames and interactions. Affection and friendship were similar in concept but mechanically distinct, and they affected different things. Affection in Pokémon Amy gave battle benefits like occasional extra critical hits or surviving a finishing blow on 1 HP. Friendship powered certain evolutions and move interactions. Neither value was displayed as a number. Players had two separate hidden stats affecting gameplay and evolution, both unmeasurable except through qualitative NPC assessments. The two systems were eventually merged and streamlined in later generations, but the Generation 6 implementation produced a period where players weren't sure which system their actions were affecting or whether they were close enough on either metric for the outcomes they wanted. 12 mistakes from 2 generations of games, spanning the shift from dual-screen handhelds to the 3DS and the introduction of fully 3D Pokémon gameplay. Looking back at the Generation 5 and VI era, there's a pattern worth noting. Many of the mistakes in this period are less about code errors and more about the gap between what was communicated to players and what actually shipped. The Gardevoir trailer move, the Battle Frontier explanation, the Wonder Trade's promise versus its execution, the Pokémon Bank crash on a day when players were most eager to use it. Social media was maturing at the same time. Players who found issues in Gen I or Gen 2 mostly discovered them through friends or gaming magazines. Players who found issues in Gen V and VI reported them online in real time, compared notes, and arrived at consensus quickly. We'll see that dynamic accelerate considerably in the modern era. Let's go to the modern era now, where the games moved to the Nintendo Switch, Pokémon arrived on phones in earnest, and the mistakes got considerably more public. The modern era of Pokémon moved the franchise onto the Nintendo Switch, and, with Pokémon Go, onto mobile phones in a way that reached a global audience that dwarfed the handheld base. The scale changed, the audience changed, and the mistakes, when they happened, became considerably more visible, documented in real time on social media, and discussed by a much larger number of people than had been paying attention to earlier generations. A few of these are familiar as controversies. Most are just the game's code doing something it shouldn't. Pokémon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee are the Switch's first mainline Pokémon games, released in 2018. Each features a partner Pokémon, a Pikachu or Eevee that follows the player throughout the adventure and cannot evolve. In Let's Go Pikachu, the partner Pikachu has a heart-shaped tail marking, the design indicator introduced in Generation 4 to identify female Pikachu, while also having a gender that doesn't necessarily align with what that marking would suggest across both versions. The standard gender ratio for Pikachu in the main series is heavily male-weighted, around 87.5% male. The partner Pokémon in these games use specific designs that were set independently of this ratio, and the heart-shaped tail detail, which means something specific in the game's gender system, was applied without the gender mechanics of prior generations being relevant here. It's a minor design inconsistency rather than a major error, but it's the kind of thing that players who track visual design closely noticed and noted. Pokémon Sword and Shield, released in November 2019, launched without the complete national Pokédex. Only approximately 400 of the then 807 plus species were available. Game Freak's explanation, offered by producer Junichi Masuda, was that reducing the available roster allowed them to focus on creating high-quality animations and models for each Pokémon included. Players called this Dexit, a portmanteau referencing the removal of Pokémon from the game. When the games launched, players found that many of the included Pokémon were using animations and models that appeared largely carried over from earlier 3DS games, with modest modifications. The promise of higher quality per Pokémon, offered as the justification for the cut, was not universally visible in the final product. The controversy generated significant discussion about the franchise's development practices and the pace at which mainline games were being released. Players started comparing the promised rationale against the actual animations, looking for the quality improvement that was supposed to justify the cut. They found that a lot of the included Pokémon appeared to be using the same models from the 3DS games, lightly updated. The case for the cut didn't quite hold up to scrutiny, and a lot of people noticed. The national Dex cut in Sword and Shield has not been addressed after launch. Later DLC for Sword and Shield added back some missing Pokémon. Generation 9's games included larger rosters, but the principle that the national Dex was no longer a guarantee of any given mainline game, established by Dexit and not subsequently reversed as policy, remained a change to expectations that persisted after the immediate conversation faded. The wild area in Sword and Shield is an open-world zone that supports real-time multiplayer. Players can see each other's characters wandering around and join max raid battles together. At launch, the connectivity was unstable. Players reported severe lag, raid battles that struggled to load other players in, occasional errors during join attempts, and general difficulty maintaining the online functionality that was central to the wild area experience. This was the feature that had been used to distinguish Sword and Shield from what came before. The thing the trailers kept coming back to. The open world, other players visible in it, the sense of a shared space. Having that feature be the least reliable part of the game at launch was a particular kind of frustrating, because it was the part everyone was specifically looking forward to. Pokémon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, released in November 2021, are remakes developed by Elka, the first time a mainline Pokémon game had been substantially developed by a studio other than Game Freak. The games restored many elements of the original Diamond and Pearl. In the Grand Underground, the revamped version of Diamond and Pearl's underground exploration feature, players discovered at launch that item-generating wall spots would continually respawn and could be mined repeatedly for items. Leaving and re-entering specific sections would respawn Pokémon without any cooldown or limit. This allowed players to obtain normally rare items in arbitrarily large quantities with minimal investment. The exploit was used extensively before a patch addressed it. Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl were noted for missing features present in the original games, but they did include the Vice Seeker. Seeker, which allowed players to rematch trainers, did return. However, the broader Pokémon availability of Pokémon Platinum wasn't incorporated, and the Battle Frontier, which Platinum had introduced for the Sinnoh region, wasn't included. These absences were the subject of considerable discussion among players who'd expected the remakes to build on the full Sinnoh experience rather than recreate only the base Diamond and Pearl. Pokémon Legends Arceus, released in January 2022, represented a significant departure from standard Pokémon gameplay, real-time catching and battling in an open-world historical Sinnoh. It was praised for its ambition and criticised for its technical presentation. The noble Pokémon boss fights, encounters where the player physically dodges attacks in real time while calming an agitated noble Pokémon, had hit detection issues at launch. Attacks that visually missed the player character would sometimes register as hits. Conversely, being clearly within the attack's radius occasionally produced no damage. The inconsistency made these fights, which were already a new and somewhat divisive format for the series, more frustrating for players who encountered it. The noble fights were eventually improved through patches, but the initial experience was affected by the detection irregularity. Pokémon Scarlet and Violet, released in November 2022. They were technically ambitious, open world, real time, the most expansive Pokémon games in terms of geography, and they launched in a state that the review community and player community agreed was unfinished. The most widely documented visual bug involved the world itself disappearing when throwing a Pokeball. Players throwing Pokeballs would watch entire sections of terrain, trees, and environment elements blink out of existence, black voids where landscape should be. The engine was unloading assets to handle the throwing animation and hadn't finished reloading them before showing the Pokeball on the ground. The ball would sit there, waiting, while the world slowly reassembled around it. This was documented by hundreds of players on social media on launch day. The rideable legendary Pokémon, Koraidon in Scarlet, Miraidon in Violet, were the primary means of traversing the open world. Players spent a significant portion of their playtime on these Pokémon. At launch, Koraidon and Miraidon would occasionally clip through terrain and fall through the ground. Not just slide off a slope, fall through the solid surface of the world into whatever was underneath it, which was typically an infinite void, followed by a brief wait before the game respawned the player. The fall through the world was sometimes gradual, the Pokémon sinking into the ground at a gentle rate, and sometimes immediate. For game-breaking bugs, this is on the more dramatic end of the spectrum. Your primary means of movement, falling through the world you're trying to navigate. In the cities and overworld areas of Scarlet and Violet, NPC character models would sometimes spawn incorrectly, their torsos rising vertically out of the ground with arms raised, rotating slowly. This became one of the more widely shared images from Scarlet Violet's launch period, largely because the specific pose, upper body raised, hands in the air, slow rotation, gave it the visual rhythm of someone dancing. Dancing NPC became shorthand for the game's launch state. The underlying cause was character models failing to place correctly in the world, a model placement error producing an inadvertent performance. On December 1st, 2022, Nintendo issued an official apology regarding the issues players had encountered in Scarlet and Violet, and announced the 1.1.0 update to address some of the bugs. Update 1.2.0, released in February 2023 to fix further issues, introduced a rare but documented new bug. Under specific circumstances, the update could corrupt players' save data. A patch designed to fix bugs introducing a save corruption bug is a particularly difficult kind of error to explain to players who've already had a frustrating experience. The 1.3.0 update in April 2023 fixed the Walking Wake and Iron Leaves bad egg issue and various other problems. The full patch sequence spanned several months of post-launch correction. During the DLC events for Scarlet and Violet, a 5-star Terra Raid event featuring Great Tusk and Iron Treads, the Paradox versions of Donphan, had a specific bug in its reward distribution. Clearing the raid produced items labelled as none, invalid, blank items with no actual identity. Receiving these null items caused the game to crash. The event had to be quickly removed from online availability and reissued in corrected form. For players who had already cleared it and crashed, the experience was a brief loss of progress in addition to the crash itself. Pokémon Go began rolling out in select countries in July 2016, and over time it became one of the most downloaded apps in the history of the App Store. The franchise had been building towards something like this for 20 years. The combination of smartphone technology, GPS, augmented reality, and an enormous existing fanbase produced a phenomenon that moved faster than anything Niantic had prepared for. The servers could not handle the demand. For the first several days after launch, the app was largely unplayable. Login failures were common. When players did get in, features like gyms would fail to load. Pokémon encounters would freeze. The app would disconnect mid-encounter and lose the Pokémon. These issues were widespread and universal across the player base. Niantic had prepared for significant traffic. They hadn't prepared for an app that would temporarily make international news simply by existing. The server crash at launch is, in a sense, a mistake born from success. But it's still the case that the product was unavailable to most of its users during its most high-profile window. The nearby tracker in Pokémon Go showed which Pokémon were in the player's vicinity, with footprint icons indicating rough distance, 1, 2, or 3 footprints. Several weeks after launch, the tracker stopped working. Every Pokémon in the nearby tab showed 3 footprints, regardless of actual distance. Players nicknamed this the 3-step glitch, and it made the tracking feature completely useless. Niantic's response was slow. The 3-footprint bug persisted for months before the tracker was substantially reworked. During that period, the main tool players had for finding specific Pokémon simply didn't function. This period coincided with the initial enormous wave of interest in the game. Many players who joined for the launch and encountered ongoing server problems and a broken tracker drifted away before the issues were resolved. Third-party apps and websites emerged during this period to fill the gap, tools that tracked Pokémon spawn locations in real time and let players find specific species without the in-game tracker. Niantic eventually cracked down on these services, shutting off their API access, which removed the replacement functionality before the first-party tracker was reliably working. The window between Niantic limiting third-party trackers and the in-game tracker being fixed was a particularly frustrating period for the game's most dedicated players. When the tracker was eventually redesigned and reintroduced in late 2016, it used a different visual system, showing Pokémon near specific Pokéstops, which resolved the underlying issue but worked quite differently from what players had originally expected. At Pokémon Go's launch, Ditto was not listed in the Pokédex as a catchable Pokémon. It was absent from the game. Players searched for months. Niantic confirmed Ditto existed in the game data, but gave no indication of when it would be implemented. In the games, Ditto's defining ability is transforming into other Pokémon. The natural Go mechanic would be Ditto disguising itself as a common species and being revealed only when caught. Ditto was added to the game in November 2016, roughly 4 months after launch. The mechanic confirmed what players had expected. Ditto disguised itself as common Pokémon, Rattata, Pidgey, Magikarp, and others, and was only revealed as a Ditto after being caught. The 4-month gap between launch and Ditto's arrival meant that players had been catching potential Dittos without knowing it for months, which is either frustrating or charming depending on how you feel about the situation. Pokémon Home launched in February 2020 as a cloud-based storage and transfer service, connecting different Pokémon games and allowing species to move between them. Across its operational life, Home has shipped with various transfer-related bugs. Pokémon have not lost held items during transfers in Pokémon Home. Certain species have become temporarily unable to transfer between specific connected games. In some cases, Pokémon have appeared in Home but been inaccessible, present in cloud storage but unavailable in the connected game due to compatibility or transfer limits, with no guaranteed way to send them back to their original titles. The service's complexity explains many of these issues. Managing transfers between games with very different mechanical systems, Pokémon with moves that don't exist in the destination game, held items that aren't supported, abilities that translate differently, creates a large number of edge cases. Edge cases at scale produce bugs. For players who use Home as a long-term repository for Pokémon transferred from across the series' history, these bugs are particularly stressful, the concern being that a Pokémon obtained through significant investment might be affected. What makes Home's situation worth including here is the category of thing it represents, a service designed to be the connective tissue of the franchise, the bridge between all its different eras, introducing its own failure modes. A Pokémon from Pokémon Gold migrated forward through 4 different transfer services across 20 years, finally landing in Home and then getting stuck there due to a transfer bug. That's a particular kind of frustrating that wouldn't have been possible in any earlier era of the franchise. Across the modern era, the practice of distributing mythical Pokémon through timed events, available for a specific window at specific retail locations or through specific digital codes, has resulted in mythical Pokémon that significant portions of the player base simply couldn't obtain. The problem varies by region. Some distributions were Japan only, some required visiting specific store chains, some were regional exclusives. Zirara, Marshadow, Zarude, Diancie and others were distributed with windows or regional limitations that made them inaccessible to players who weren't in the right place at the right time. Pokémon Go and Home have helped mitigate this in later years, with some mythicals being made more broadly accessible through those platforms. But the structural issue, a completed Pokédex requiring participation in timed events across a decade of distribution, has been a consistent source of frustration for completionists. The last one. And it's the most fitting, I think. Pokémon Scarlet and Violet were confirmed in June 2025 to be receiving a free upgrade for the Nintendo Switch 2, improving image quality and frame rate on the new system. The games were released in November 2022, widely criticised for their poor technical performance on the original Nintendo Switch. Frame drops, texture pop-in, draw distance issues, and the bugs we've already discussed were attributed in part to the Switch hardware struggling to run an open-world Pokémon game at an acceptable level. The Switch 2 upgrade didn't add new content, just technical improvements, stable frame rate, better image quality, the game running closer to how it might have always been intended to run, given hardware that could actually support it. The announcement confirmed, as players had long suspected, that the hardware had been a genuine constraint on what shipped in 2022. The games that launched in that compromised state sold millions of copies and broke franchise sales records. They will now, several years later, function more as intended on newer hardware. Whether that's a consolation or just the way things turned out probably depends on how your November 2022 went. That's 100. Across the games, the anime, the cards, the apps, and 29 years of a franchise that never really slowed down. A lot of things went wrong along the way. Most of them didn't much matter. A few became beloved, some were fixed, some weren't. Let's wind down. What strikes me, going back through all of this, is how many of these mistakes happened at a moment when the franchise was doing something it had never done before. Missing No happened because Game Freak built a game system ambitious enough to have memory interactions they hadn't fully mapped. The seizure episode happened because the production was moving fast enough that nobody had assessed the frame sequence for photosensitive risk before it aired. The pre-release Raichu happened because a printing operation was running at a scale and pace that allowed one sheet's worth of cards to go through the wrong stamp. Scarlet and Violet launched in the state they did because building an open-world Pokémon game was genuinely harder than building what had come before. Not all mistakes are like that. Some are just, someone typed the wrong city name, or forgot to colour Ash's cap brim, or drew Meowth walking on all fours for 2 frames. Those things happen in any project with enough moving parts and enough hours in production. But a lot of them trace back to ambition meeting reality, to a team trying to do something that hadn't been done before, and not quite getting every part of it right. The other thing that strikes me is how little most of these mistakes actually changed how people feel about the franchise. Gen I is still regarded with real affection by the people who grew up with it, bugs and all. The original anime is still watched by people who weren't alive when it first aired. The early card sets are still collected, and the error cards are collected specifically. Missing No has a fan base. I think that's remarkable, honestly. A glitch that exists because the game tried to load something that didn't exist became one of the most loved things in the franchise's history. It has a personality, a mystique. People encounter it and keep it rather than resetting. A mistake made beloved. There are more than 100 of these, by the way. We got through 100 tonight, and I could do several more hours easily. The anime alone has enough animation errors to fill quite a few videos, and the TCG error card catalogue goes very deep once you start pulling threads. The Gen I glitch ecosystem in particular is something researchers are still mapping. New interactions between old bugs get documented every year. If there's a specific corner of this you'd want to go further into, just the Gen I glitches, or the trading card errors, or the anime continuity problems, I'm happy to do any of those separately. But for now, that's where we'll leave it. 100 things that went wrong in something that's been going right, more or less, for nearly 30 years. which is a pretty good record, all things considered. The franchise that's made of mistakes, the glitches and goofs and oversights and dropped threads, and somehow kept going anyway, kept being loved, kept expanding. There's something quite reassuring about that, honestly. Thanks for spending this time with me. Sleep well.